My name is Craig Bergland, and I ain't here to make no friends. Welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. It's called American Burqa. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but there's a lot of jokers running around looking pretty much like me. You might see them at the store because they don't quite get the whole thing about how even with 2 layers of fabric, you're not protecting yourself. You're really just protecting other people, which is great and everything, except that these dumb shits really aren't interested in protecting other people. They think they're protecting themselves. And how do you know this? Because they walk right up next to you as if they're now impervious to all danger. And if you don't see them wearing this in the store, you'll see them marching around protesting the fact that they feel that their rights have been infringed upon, that they're restricted to their homes, and that's un-American. And they too, whether they're wearing this or not, will violate the idea of social distancing. They'll be right on top of each other, thinking that they're impervious to the disease. And yet, how many pastors have we seen? And I think this is beautiful. If you ever wondered if God has a sense of humor, all you have to do is take a look at the number of clergy who have violated the safer at home orders, held their worship services, contracted COVID, and died. That is funny. Of course, their suffering isn't funny, but the fact that they brought it on themselves because they didn't believe what science told them, that is funny. And then there's these clowns wearing this stuff at their protests, carrying their rifles. I call them the American Taliban. If you're so darn proud of what you're doing, why are you masked? Why are you hiding who you are? Why are you marching around with your little picket signs, but afraid you're going to get arrested? I thought you were a big man. I thought you were a big man with a big gun compensating for other things that perhaps you feel aren't quite adequate. And you're stomping around. So you must be a big tough guy, right? Who's hiding your identity because you know that you probably wouldn't fare too well in jail. Now I'll tell you the biggest problem with this whole outfit is that it's hotter than hell. God, I don't know how you people do this shit. I'd rather stay 6 feet away from everybody, because after all, I ain't here to make no friends, than have to boil in my American burqa. Now, why do I call it American burqa? Well, I call it American burqa because, as you may or may not be aware, there are some cities that have outlawed wearing the burqa and the headscarf that reveals only the eyes, because they feel like they can't tell if there's a terrorist under there, dressed as a woman, a transvestite terrorist. You know, I'm sorry. If you're a transvestite and not a terrorist, I'm not laughing at you. But if you are a transvestite terrorist, I need some help with this. Because I don't think there's a lot of you. And I think these cities that are all concerned about transvestite terrorists dressing up in a burqa maybe need a little reality check. But it occurs to me that the same people who... Oh, look at this now. We'll get to that in a minute. The same people who are afraid of transvestite terrorists wearing burqas are the people who are out there now wearing the American burqa. Only that's okay because they're Americans. And I guess they get to hide their identity whenever they want. But if you happen to be an American citizen who is wearing the equivalent of a mask over their face because of your religious beliefs, well, the only freedom of religion that exists in America to these clowns is their religion, which is pretty much conservative, evangelical, anti-science, flat earth society. And their definition of freedom of religion is they get to impose their religious views on you. So they're the only ones that really have the freedom. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, it just means that your reasoning is intact. Now, along those lines, along those lines, you might have noticed that these protesters were right on top of each other, some of them wearing masks, others not. But let's remember, the mask will not protect you from the coronavirus. What they're hoping is when you wet sneeze and slobber all over everywhere, and because you lack the common courtesy or the social graces or both to get your hand up over your face, they're hoping it'll knock down some of your spray and you'll be less likely to infect other people. What it won't do is stop microscopic particles from blowing right through that mask you have on and infecting you. So in the news, we saw these people just jammed together in front of various state capitals around the country, protesting the fact that their rights are being unfairly infringed upon, and that they have the right to go out and contract this illness and die if they want to. Of course, they don't believe the science. They tend to be a bit paranoid and more than a little into conspiracy theories. But the problem, of course, is if I go out and contract this illness because I'm an idiot, I'm going to want to get treated. I'm going to want to go to the hospital. I'm going to take up medical resources that really, if the world was a fair place, would be reserved for those people who didn't go out begging to get the coronavirus in their anti-science ignorance. Those resources would be saved for the people who did their best to avoid it and couldn't. But the world is in a fair place. And it seems like, although I'm sure this is just my impression, it seems like quite often it's the fools who benefit from the world not being a fair place. Now, lest you think I'm ranting too much, I was looking out my window over there because the neighbors, who are very concerned about the coronavirus, and apparently have access to some information that says that the only people that are susceptible to coronavirus are people they don't know. So, yet another yoker pulled in the driveway to visit them just now. And yet, there's some much needed work that needs to be done to their home and our home. We share a townhome here. And as the neighbor was explaining to me yesterday, she's not going to have that, give permission for those people to come into her house until after this coronavirus is over because she doesn't know them. If there's one good thing that's coming out of all this, it's that we're starting to see, sadly, people's true colors. We're starting to see how many narcissists there are in our world. We're starting to see how many conspiracy theorists there are in our world. We're starting to see how many people of whom it can really reasonably be said it's a wonder that they function. How do they get through daily life? Here's a little self-test. If you refer to mainstream news media as the Matrix, everything's not quite right up here. Probably time for better living through chemistry, some nice prescription medications, and if that doesn't work, better living through electricity with some electroconvulsive shock therapy, because what's going on up here is not good. And if, believe it or not, and I know you don't, what's going on up here is impacting your quality of life. As we hear all these voices calling us to reconcile, to bridge the deep political divides in this country, we have to ask ourselves, what exactly does that mean? I'm wondering, what does it mean? Does it mean that I have to look at people who are, quite frankly, batshit crazy and say to them, oh yeah, interesting. That I have to look at somebody who's lining their windows with aluminum foil to keep the transmissions from outer space out, but believes they have some special insight into how the world ought to run, that I need to look at them and say, oh, I bet you're right. No. There are people coming out of the woodwork who I believe have been able to continue to function largely because they hide in the woodwork. And if a part of healing the divide in this country, the political divide especially, but the social divide as well, is telling people who are really quite ill that, nah, you're all right. It's fine. Then I have to tell you, I'm not interested in healing the divide, because that's not a compassionate thing to do. If you have a friend who's actively suicidal with a plan, calls you up and said, hey, I just wanted to say goodbye, I'm going to kill myself now, and you don't call 911 on their behalf, you're not much of a friend. And what we have are these people running around whose contact with reality is tenuous at best. Potentially violent people. People who cannot act in their own self-interest because of their delusions. And if we don't call 911, we're not being very good friends or neighbors or fellow citizens. The idea that I can allow myself to become just as radicalized as I want to be, engage in behaviors that are just as intrusive, disruptive, offensive, and in fact dangerous as I want them to be, and that the rest of the world needs to sit around, because we all need to make nice and get along, and say to me, oh, you're not crazy, Phil. That's flawed thinking. That's one of these peace at any cost ideas that says, truth doesn't really matter. What matters is that there's no upset. And I'm sorry, that's crappy reasoning. And I know that saying that will make me unpopular. I know that some of you won't invite me to your little post-safer-at-home get-together where we can sit in the backyard and I get to pretend that I like you. But that's okay. It's going to be fine. Because I'm Craig Bergland, and I ain't here to make no friends.